One of the tightest races in the state is the 4th District, where Congressman Jim Himes is seeking a second term. I spoke with the congressman earlier this week. And the congressman from the 4th District is our guest today. Good to see you back here, Congressman.
Dennis, great to be back.
I know you came on. This is about your 5th appearance because you came on 3 times when you were running, so
yeah.
We certainly welcome you back. You were quoted as saying that you've become more like Chris Shays than Dan DiBasella is, that you have more in common with Chris Shays than DiBasella does. How is that true? Because the congressman said that he couldn't laugh hard enough, or something like that was his quote.
Well, I think if you look at Dan DiBasella's record, and you look at who Chris Shays was, Chris Shays, for example, was a lifetime hero of the League of Conservation Voters. Lifetime hero. Dan DiBasella, in his time in Hartford, has racked up the single worst environmental record. Chris Shays introduced, with Jim Langevin, a Democrat in Congress, universal health care proposals. Dan DiBasella has said he would repeal health care reform. So I'm not sure I said that I'm more like him. I'm just saying that if you put Chris Shays on the political spectrum between me and a very right-wing candidate, Dan DiBasella, you probably would find that we had more in common than he does with Dan DiBasella.
What is the #1 reason that voters shouldn't choose your opponent over you this year?
Because, you know, I've worked hard, worked very, very hard at a tough moment in our economy. When I went to Congress, we were losing 700,000 jobs every single month. Wall Street was run rampant. It was a casino. We looked at a healthcare system that, whatever you think of healthcare reform, was not serving enough people, was going up in cost 15% every single year, and we took big steps on these matters. I'm not going to tell you they were perfect, but I'm going to tell you that we took big steps. We are now adding jobs in the private sector, not nearly fast enough, but we're adding jobs. We see GDP growing again. The markets have recovered. Again, none of this stuff has been completed, just as healthcare reform is not complete. We're going to be working on this stuff for many years to come, and I've been an independent voice. I've listened to my constituents, dozens of town hall meetings, and I've worked hard in Washington on these big and important steps that I think you want somebody who is moderate and thoughtful and independent representing the 4th District in Connecticut, not somebody who's always been on the fringe extreme of their party.
Are your constituents better off today than they were 2 years ago?
Well, I don't think any Americans are better off today than they were 2 years ago. Again, 2 years ago, we were losing 700,000 jobs a month, and we are only now beginning to emerge from what could have been a 1930s-style depression. So sometimes when people ask that question, they're saying, well, has Obama and has this Congress helped? Has it fixed everything? Things were never going to be fixed, given the size of the catastrophe in 2 years. But we've come a long way and yet have a long way to go.
Is the president completely blameless in this? Is it still, I mean, a lot of folks, a lot of Democrats are still blaming President Bush, saying it's his problem. He gave us this mess. We're still working out of it. Has President Obama made any mistakes along the way? Well,
look, the whole blame thing is I think, the wrong way to think about it, right? Why are we in this economic catastrophe, right? We had banks acting wildly irresponsibly. Do you pin that on a president? I don't think so. You pin that on the system. We had risk-taking that was, rewarded overnight, whereas people who were producing value, on a year in and year out weren't getting. We had credit rating agencies who completely fell down. We had regulatory agencies that weren't operative. There's so much blame to go around. To say that this is about one president or another, the question is, can we craft in this area a financial system that is providing capital to small businesses, to families, to send kids to college, to buy houses, without taking on the kind of risks that brought down the system? I was very active in the writing of the Wall Street reform bill, and I think that bill struck that balance. And that's what we need to continue to do.
When you talk about jobs, let's look at Fairfield County. On the eve of your historic election, 2008, when you defeated Congressman Himes, unemployment rate in Fairfield County was 5.5%. It's now 8.5%. How do you persuade people that you deserve another chance, that things are better?
Well, again, remember, when we took office in early 2009, the economy was in absolute free fall. We worried that the entire banking sector would go belly up. We were losing 700,000 jobs a month. Now, for 8 straight months, we have added private sector jobs. Not at the rate that we want to add them to, and this is why we need to keep thinking about this stuff. But look, we inherited a disaster. And I'm not blaming any president or saying that this is his fault, but to say that we didn't step in to do some pretty aggressive things to try to turn this economy around is just not accurate. And by the way, I would point out that we tried to do that in the face of absolutely brutal opposition, which just said to any idea, no matter whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, the answer from the other side was absolutely not. want. And so, look, we've worked hard. Are we where we need to be? Absolutely not. We need jobs being added at 500,000 a month, but that will come as we keep working intelligently and in a non-ideological way to build the foundation of this economy again.
Let's talk about the president a little bit and the Democratic leadership. The voting record shows you voted with the Democratic leadership about 94% of the time. Do you think Speaker Pelosi is taking Congress in the right direction?
I don't think a lot about Speaker Pelosi. My job is to represent my constituents and to do the best job that I can. These percentages, remember, about half the votes that we take in the Congress are celebrating some baseball team or naming some post offices. So what you'll find is that even, hardcore Republicans actually vote with Nancy Pelosi a fair amount of the time. I have parted with my party in a couple of areas where I thought it was important to do so. On spending, I have for a long time voted against any spending bills that I thought were either poorly timed or poorly constructed, because we have a very serious debt issue to address in the coming years, and on some ethics issues. And that has resulted in my being, and you can check this on Washington Post, having the most independent voting record of any congressperson in all of New England.
Would you vote for another stimulus package if it was handed down to you?
Well, I think that depends a lot on where the economy goes. If we see an acceleration at the rate at which we're adding jobs and economic growth, it may not be necessary. If we go into a double dip, look, if we start seeing unemployment rising again, people losing their jobs across this country, we're going to need to consider that. And we'll consider just what we did 2 years ago, which is what is the right mix of, hopefully smart infrastructure spending. I say this representing Fairfield County, where we could really use some infrastructure injection, and the tax cuts that will, hopefully get people out there buying things again.
Some of your colleagues have been reportedly backing away from the president and Speaker Pelosi. Let's talk about her for just a moment. One of your colleagues, Chet Edwards, was hesitant to endorse her for another term as House Speaker. Do you think, if the Democrats hold on to control, that Mrs. Pelosi is the best Speaker for the House? Would you endorse her re-election?
Dennis, at a time when, as you point out, unemployment is high, I have devoted exactly no time to thinking about whether Nancy Pelosi or Steny Hoyer or anybody else would be the best leader. I'm focused on getting the job done for my constituents and on getting re-elected. In the next 6 weeks, we're going to tell a story. We're going to tell two very different stories to the people of Southwest Connecticut about the vision for moving forward. I have not given one iota of thought. I have never been shy about parting with the president and parting with Speaker Pelosi when I thought it was right. On spending bills, I'm taking a lot of guff from my own party now because I've come out in favor of a temporary extension for the high-end tax cuts for the reason that, economically speaking, and the economists are pretty consistent on this, now is not the time in a very hesitant recovery to raise taxes on anybody, on small businesses, on anybody. And as a result, I have heard from my party loud and clear, but look, I do what I think is right for the economy and for my constituents. I'm going to continue to do that.
It seems non-committal, though, your support for Speaker Pelosi. I mean, you can right now say, I'd like to see her reelected as Speaker. But you're hesitant to say it.
I haven't given it an iota of thought. Look, personally, think about what she has been able to accomplish. Whatever you think of whether those accomplishments were good or bad, you got to sort of give her the title of Iron Lady. If I get reelected, and if they put a vote on the table before Congress of who gets to be the leader, minority, or a majority, at that point I'll give it a lot of thought. But look, when you have 15 million people unemployed in this country, to be spending a lot of time thinking about who should lead the Congress, I think, is misplaced thinking.
Let's talk a little bit about those Bush tax cuts. You want them temporarily extended. What about a permanent extension? If someone comes to you in Weston or Wilton where these tax cuts actually hurt people, would you, or help them, they would hurt them if they were to disappear, how do you explain to them that you don't want this to be permanent?
Well, it's not that I don't want them to be permanent. Look, like anybody else, I'd love to see lower taxes for everybody all the time, and that's an easy thing to say, right? But here's the fact. To make all of those 01 and 03 tax cuts permanent, to not allow them to expire, the way the Bush administration and the Republican Congress designed them to do, will over 10 years cost us $3.3 trillion. Let me say that number again, $3.3 trillion. So let's have that discussion. Absolutely. Let's decide that because our constituency wants permanent tax cuts, let's make them permanent. But then you got to tell me, where's that $3.3 trillion in 10 years going to come from? What programs do you cut? Or where does the tax revenue come from? So I'm happy to enter into that discussion, but having spent a lot of time looking at the fiscal challenges that face this country, I'm telling you it's not an easy thing to do. Pentagon budget, $700 billion a year. One way to do that would be to cut the Pentagon budget in half. Are we going to do that? Of course not. So it's when you get into the details that these issues become real and difficult.
What's your biggest accomplishment in Congress?
You know, I think my biggest accomplishment, I would say two things. One, I've worked terribly hard for my constituents. I've listened to them. No meeting was too slanted that I wouldn't go to it. I went to a meeting sponsored by the Ridgefield Republican Town Committee on Healthcare because I felt I had an obligation to listen to each and every one of my constituents, even if one of those constituents wanted to shout at me. And I think I've worked very hard to communicate with my constituents, to work on their behalf. Policy-wise, I'm very proud of the role that I played on the Wall Street reform bill. You had Wall Street acting like a casino. I was one of the few members of Congress who actually had experience working for a financial institution, and I worked 24/7 for many, many weeks to create a balanced bill, which will keep that industry in this country, which will keep that industry employing people in the 4th District, but which won't, I think, ever again allow them to do the crazy things that got us into so much trouble over the last couple of years.
Let's talk a little bit about the health care bill. How is it good for people in Fairfield County?
Well, you've got a lot of people in Fairfield County who are out of work right now, as you pointed out. Now, if a person loses their job, they lose their health insurance. And you, by the way, you can be a wealthy businessman. You lose your job and you probably lose your insurance. There are an awful lot of people running around today without a job saying, what happens to me? If you're 55 years old, 10 years away from Medicare, now, once this health care reform is fully built out, you'll have a reasonably cost option. We've, of course, got thousands of people with no access to coverage. We've got 24-year-olds in Fairfield County who, before this health care reform, couldn't have gone on their parents' policies. We've got tens of thousands of seniors on Medicare who, over time, are not going to have to pay into that donut hole anymore, which has forced many of our seniors to choose between rent and buying their pills.
So you'd vote for it again if it were?
Well, yes, I would vote for it again. And it's not perfect. There's things I would change in it, but, for 100 years we have been trying to fix this, this just awful system that left so many people behind, and we've taken the first step in that regard.
One final question, sort of a behind-the-scenes question. When you do buck the president or buck the speaker, do you ever get a call from, like, Rahm Emanuel? How does it work exactly?
From time to time you get those calls.
Personally from the president?
No, I've actually never gotten a call from the president. I have gotten a call from the president's chief of staff from time to time, which is always interesting. Look, at the end of the day, I'm staking out.
What kind of language does he use?
Nothing I can repeat here on camera. But look, I've parted with the president on spending issues. I've parted with the president on a couple of issues lately on these tax cuts. I'm on a different place from the president with respect to Afghanistan. I think that this sort of remake Afghanistan model is not likely to work. And, sometimes you hear about it, sometimes you don't.
Should we pull out now briefly?
What's that?
Should we pull out of Afghanistan now?
What I would do is I would drastically reduce the mission away from what we're doing right now, which is basically trying to build the nation to work with Karzai. I would make it a very limited anti-terror, counter-terror mission. Let's keep a couple of bases from which we can project force into Pakistan, where we can take out terrorist infrastructure in Afghanistan, but let's leave building the political and the economic system of Afghanistan to the Afghans.
Congressman Jim Himes, good to see you back here on again.
Thanks, Dennis.